Coming up on this episode of Common Denominator.
Just like you practice against a punch, just like you practice against a bear hug, a headlock, a knife attack, having a code, living by a code, teaches you and prepares you for these moments.
Hi, and welcome to Common Denominator, where we shine a light on people striving to make the world a better place. Today, Jiu-Jitsu instructor Gui Valente and the work he does with students of all ages. Gui and I just spoke, and what really resonates with me is when he sits across the table from me and seemingly to the world, he seems so at peace with himself. But when I asked him about the specific work that he does on himself, that he believes he has to work on, is that patience and groundedness. So that really stuck out for me. Before we play my chat with Gui, a quick reminder that if you like the show, please subscribe and follow me on social media at Popack. Now, here's my conversation with Gui Valente. Enjoy. Hi, Gui. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So we were just laughing before the show. I guess it's been 12 years we've been hanging out. Now we're a little role reversal for the show. 12 years training jiu-jitsu, as you're my teacher and I'm your student. So it's really great to have you here on the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. For people that don't know, how would you describe, kind of high level, the concept of jiu-jitsu?
No, first of all, thank you again for having me. As you know, my brothers and I really dedicate ourselves to the art, to the practice of jiu-jitsu, and some of our best friends are our students. It's really a community. The school is really our family, and it's always great to have the opportunity to share ideas. Oftentimes we're seen as teachers, but we learned from our dear Grandmaster Helio that we as teachers, we end up learning more from our students than actually teaching them. And when I think of you, definitely, I've learned a lot from you in many different ways. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Jiu-Jitsu for us is an art of self-defense and a way of life. It's always been that way, and that's what we try to teach and share with our students. A very complete fighting system that is deeply rooted in of course, in the martial system of Japan. Became really prominent in Japan through the legendary samurai warrior, and going through many changes, of course, adaptations through different periods of time. It came to Brazil, and we were very fortunate to learn it from one of the main sources.
When was that? That was, in other words, where jiu-jitsu came from Japan to Brazil. How many years was that? Maybe like 100 years ago in the early 1900s? Was that?
Yeah, about that. Well, it came through different Japanese teachers, but we would have to really credit the main one, I guess, Mitsuyo Maeda. He was not the first one. Oftentimes, people think in jiu-jitsu that he was the first one or he was the only one to bring it from Japan, but he definitely was the most prominent one, and he was the one that in some way taught it to our lineage, right, to Carlos Gracie, Hélio Gracie's brother. This is in the early 1900s in the north of Brazil, in a state that neighbors the Amazon state called Pará, in a town called Belém do Pará. And Carlos Gracie, the oldest of the Gracie brothers, learned it from this Japanese master, moved away, his family moved away to the southeast, and eventually his youngest brother learned it as well as the other brothers, and made it very famous. And he taught my grandfather, he taught my father, and he taught us. Wow. So it's now Of course, we represent 3 generations, but our kids are already practicing jiu-jitsu too. So 4 generations of the Valente family to practice jiu-jitsu.
Right. I saw your child and Pedro's child, right? They're all practicing and
Yes.
and they start young. When would you recommend a child to start training?
Well, if the parents practice, I think that it starts even before the child is born through the lifestyle and the impact that that has, right, in pregnancy, and we believe that. But I think that 2.5, 3, my son just turned 2.5, and he started. We have a Little Champs program, a group class program, where we recommend students to be at least 3 years old. So you can do privates at a very early age. And there are motor skill games, of course, discipline, confidence, but very specific physical education exercises designed for even for babies. So,
and for yourself and your brothers, when was that first experience? Like, how did you? I know your father and your grandfather.
Correct. Officially, starting to attend classes between 2.5 and 3 years old. I was 2.5 the first time I went. I had, of course, my older brother Pedro, who's 5 years older than I am. He helped out, so he could also take me, and I would, watch his privates and play around on the mat, and just slowly becoming comfortable on the mat. Because one of the main benefits of jiu-jitsu specifically is the fact that we do a lot of grappling, and we lost that as, humans. This is very instinctive for us. Even in the animal world, you see from cats to dogs to monkeys to mammals, really, when they're very young, they're always grappling, if you can call it that way. They're always in contact with each other. Many times we stop children from doing that, right? A lot. And we need that from an early age. We need to be in contact. We need to be rough housing, right? That's very important. And now you see many psychologists starting to talk about it, but that's something that for us growing up, our teachers, we always believed that. And jiu-jitsu is the perfect place for children to do that in a safe way, in a technical way, where they're actually learning something of great value.
One thing that set me, for me, when I first started training, I always thought about the difference between the Valente Brothers Studio and, the foundations and the setup compared to other martial arts. Maybe you can explain the difference between that.
So jiu-jitsu, as I said, is a very ancient martial art, and the way we like to describe it is that there are many different expressions of jiu-jitsu. Today, for example, possibly the most famous expression is the sportive, just because of the number of competitors and schools that focus on tournament jiu-jitsu for points. And that's great. I have many friends. I actually grew up in Brazil in close contact with that type of practice. However, our teacher, Grandmaster Hélio, really the founder of our teaching methodology, he was not in favor of jiu-jitsu for sport. Of course, when I say sports, it's for tournaments, right? With the objective of scoring points, which is very similar, for those that don't know, very similar to wrestling with a jacket, with a kimono, the gi, what some people refer to as the judo gi. And we focus on the more holistic, you can call it, approach, which includes, of course, a lot of grappling, but always with a focus on self-defense, on survival. So if you're training for survival, if you're training for the streets, for the unpredictable nature of a street confrontation, you have to practice striking. You have to practice how to defend yourself on your feet. Most fights, I think all fights, start when you're standing up. Most importantly, you have to practice scenario. You have to understand risk management, right? You have to know how to assess a situation. Who's around you? Where are you? How can maybe you avoid being in a position of risk? So all of that is what we focus on. And naturally, if you're training for competition, for tournaments, you have to focus on what tournaments call for, on the necessities of tournament. Another expression of jiu-jitsu is judo, right? Judo is an Olympic sport. An Olympic athlete, he's not going to waste his time, quote unquote, waste his time learning, for example, or practicing a knife defense, how to deal with a knife, how to deal with firearms, because that's not in the sport of judo, just like it's not in the sport of BJJ. So at Valente Brothers, we like to think always of the street scenarios, and of course, the philosophy, understanding how to apply jiu-jitsu outside of the mat. That for us is also very important.
I know now, I just think about it now, as I'm training brown belt and training, and again, we don't necessarily have so much heavy relevance on the belts that we are, but 12 years training, most of the things that I think about is not even on the mat. I think about, to your point, it's like that mastery of emotions. And I have to bring up that story because every time I think about it, it impacts me. And we talked a little bit about it before the show. And I know that your brothers and yourself were very, very close with your father. And I remember after your father had passed, Pedro, when he found out that your father had passed, he was teaching a class. And when someone came in and told him there's no fluctuation in any of his body, and he just continued to finish the class. And again, he was, like the way Pedro explains it, I'm getting like a little emotional about it, but that it was like he was one with his dad. You know what I mean? And again, when I think about what we train here at Valente Brothers, it's the idea that it's completely holistic. We had a situation, I had a house party, and there was someone that got rowdy, hit a security guard. And my two older boys were watching me, and this fellow, you could feel his energy. He was pulsating, maybe he was on drugs, maybe he was something. And only because of the training, I went over to him, I assessed, there were no weapons, and I felt it was just an instinct, and I actually hugged the guy. And the whole issue de-escalated. Otherwise, it would have been, I call it like toe-to-toe. It would have been, maybe he would have struck me, maybe it would have been risk situation. And that's above sport jiu-jitsu, above anything other martial arts. It's the mindset and that assessment, and always to try to avoid,
Yeah, the word de-escalation, so important, right? I think many times we, because of ego, and that's a very deep word, but we often find the necessity to escalate, like you said, go toe-to-toe and try to prove something to yourself or maybe to others around you, and that never goes well. So my teacher used to say, view those that don't practice jiu-jitsu in a confrontation, of course, in a conflict, as children. If a child says something to you that you don't like, what are you going to do? You're going to beat up the child? Of course not. So never allow someone's words control you, right? Never allow that to happen, because that can be very dangerous. In regards to what you remembered about our dad and the moment that we heard about his passing, I was there with my brother. We were at the old school, right? Still on 163rd, but that old location that we used to train a lot together. And our youngest brother, who had been in Brazil, Joaquim, he actually called us. I was watching the class, so I had my phone, and I went to Pedro. I called him. He stepped outside of the tatami, and we gave him the news, and we hugged. It's actually on video because we kept the security camera footage, and we hugged, and for a moment, of course, very emotional. We knew that this could happen. Our father was already in the hospital, and we just continued because that's what we learned from our father, just to continue. When our teacher, Grandmaster Ed, who passed away, who was like our grandfather to us, when he passed away, our father called us and spoke to us and then sent us a letter to the three of us, the three brothers, to my sister as well, who lives in Brazil, who's a show riding champion. But he wrote in the letter, we have to now pick up the flag and keep running up the hill, right? Yeah. So that's the mentality that we were raised with. Our father passed away, we continue. Pedro went back to the mat and continued teaching. Of course, we respect each one's ways and also sometimes religious differences on how to deal with a moment like that. But, and of course, we had our moments too, and that's very important to accept those feelings. But we had to grab that flag and just keep going up the hill like he taught us to do.
Of all things, when I think about that, to the audience, I know that I apply that idea to just continue, to just keep moving forward, fortitude, grit.
Yeah.
Is there a mechanism, like a how-to? I always think about roll it back. Things happen in life to every single human. What are some tools? What are some realistic tools? Some shock comes at you. What can we tell the audience is practical tools?
Just with anything else, you need to have a plan. You need to practice that plan, right? So how can we do that? We believe that we should all have a code. We should all have a philosophy. Some use religion, but you should have something in your life that helps you. We have, for example, our 753 code philosophy, which is how we organize the philosophy of jiu-jitsu for us. And that helps a lot because just like you practice against a punch, just like you practice against a bear hug, a headlock, a knife attack, having a code, living by a code, teaches you and prepares you for these moments, right? And you don't find yourself lost.
So you mentioned the 753 code. So for people that don't know, what's kind of the high level?
So the 753 code is really our way of describing, of teaching, of organizing the jiu-jitsu philosophy. Oftentimes you hear mind, body, and spirit, and that's what the 753 represent. So you have the 7, which is pretty much the Bushido code from the Japanese warrior, the 5 or 5 keys to physical health, and the 3 are the 3 most important elements of your intellectual health. So those 3 parts together, the 7, the 5, and the 3, help us tremendously understand better who we are, what we're doing, and where we're going.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to the Common Denominator podcast. My guest is jiu-jitsu instructor Gui Valente. Next week, I'll chat with Purple Heart recipient and military hero Noah Galloway. Noah lost part of his left leg and part of his left arm during Operation Iraqi Freedom. But he persevered and rose from a post-trauma depression to write a memoir, grace the cover of Men's Health, compete on Dancing with the Stars, and inspire millions of people along the way. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. Now, back to the show. Someone was just mentioning, actually, because we all look for meaning and purpose. And actually, the purpose, when you talk about a code, you say maybe it could be religion or...
Yeah.
In the end, you have to create that framework.
Correct.
Otherwise, you're swimming in a sea of,
You're lost, and you'll find yourself sometimes giving in to your emotions. We all have emotions. We're all human, right? That's the cliche, and that's so true. We all have moments where sometimes we look for answers, and we need to have that compass, right? Always there. And that's how I see it. Having the code, having a philosophical system, like you said, a framework, is that compass, which sometimes is very, very important and can save your life.
I remember a couple of years ago, Pedro used the analogy when you're out in the ocean, right? He always uses that, and the waves are coming at you, right? If you fight that, your odds go down for survival. If you let go and allow those waves to come over you, and you just flow, that's what we all search for.
Yielding, many times, it's a word now that we oftentimes use to describe, to translate jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is the art of yielding flexibility. Some people call it the gentle art, but these come from Japanese kanji. So the kanji is not just like our letters. Of course, they represent so much more words. Sometimes multiple words are needed to describe one kanji. And the kanji ju is exactly that. It teaches you to yield. And the analogy you reminded us that we like to use a lot about being in the ocean is perfect. Oftentimes, and that's the difference between sometimes what we do and the sportive martial arts. In sports, martial arts tournaments, you have, for example, a time period, and you have to go. So imagine that, being caught in the ocean, being caught in a riptide, and someone telling you, fight harder, swim, freestyle yourself out of it. You'll drown. So in life, many times you can't do that. You have to just stay, be calm, and wait for the right time.
I remember, I always loved that, like Master Yoda in Star Wars. And it was like, a bunch of Jedi were being killed. And he's this master, right? This little short, Master Yoda. And he retreats back. He goes back and he says, listen, I got to regroup. And then he comes back. It's like that lesson. It's not always, like you're saying, go, go, go.
Oh.
And always, and in every discipline, how do you deal, a white belt, someone comes and begins to train, and he has all these kind of like preconceived notions. I think of like so many years I spent undoing the learning. So how's that process?
Well, we have a system, as you know, based on reflex development, right? It's based on learning skills and repeating them over and over again so that they become part of you. So rather having to remember, rather having to try to come up with something in a specific situation, an attack, we try to build these techniques inside of our defensive systems. Just like you blink an eye without thinking, you develop the techniques also without thinking. And simultaneously, learning about the philosophy, as we said before, understanding also the history of the martial arts, we find that very important. Really learning the art of jiu-jitsu in its most complete way.
What would you say is like top level for mentally, for people's framework? In other words, the benefits of training jiu-jitsu, individuals kind of, I've seen this actually, a mental difference or an emotional difference of humans before they train jiu-jitsu, and then years later, the actual benefits.
Well, for us, it's actually a very big word. I'm going to try to say it correctly. Imperturbability. Imperturbability.
Yeah.
That is our main objective. And I think that's what we all want. Of course, learning how to defend yourself is huge, to give us more peace of mind for children, right? With everything that we go through in our young ages, in the different stages of our development, the ability to be ready to fight and to defend yourself, right? Regardless of how much protection you may have, which, by the way, sometimes too much protection can actually be counterproductive. So this independence of being able to defend yourself helps bring us to a point of peace of mind, becoming more easygoing. I think that's really one of the main benefits. Very difficult to achieve, and we're different also. Some might have those natural maybe ways to achieve that. Others have to work a little bit harder. But I think that's really the main objective. And that has such an amazing impact on different parts of our life. How many diseases are a product of stress, right? How many problems, psychological problems, and we know how that oftentimes leads to other types of problems, right? Vices, the necessity of drugs, the necessity of legal or not illegal drugs to find more peace. So I think that our objective, the way we teach martial arts, the way we teach jiu-jitsu is really about bringing peace.
Yeah, and I also know that you work with law enforcement and military.
Yes.
How is those experiences? Is it different than training in the
Yeah, of course, for us, jiu-jitsu, the way we learned it from our teacher was always about efficiency, right? Fighting, efficiency, effectiveness. We always believed that what we taught was the best when it came to hand-to-hand combat. And for that reason, we had the opportunity to work with some of the most elite police and military forces in the world. I had the opportunity one time with the U.S. Army, with the U.S. military, to go to Iraq during the war, still in 2007, between 2007 and 2008. I had the opportunity to go to Israel and teach some of the most elite forces there, of course in Brazil. And again, even with those groups, there are life and death situations, and of course, learning those skills help, but also teaching them how to be ready to make better decisions is a huge part of what we do. It's not just the fighting, because many times they're going to have weapons and they don't want to be in a position where they have to use hand-to-hand combat skills, right? We want to avoid that as much as possible. So the skills of jiu-jitsu also help them not only when they're not in battle, but on how to make better decisions.
And one thing that is tremendous in my mind, which is completely counterintuitive, where you can have someone that's, let's say, 130 pounds, going up to a huge muscular fellow who's 250 pounds, and just, again, to that efficiency, being able, to manage that intelligently.
Yeah. And we've seen that work many times. I had the opportunity to feel that power, that amazing power that jiu-jitsu gives us. When someone does not know jiu-jitsu and you know jiu-jitsu, even with a huge size difference, you can manage to overcome that attack. And even if you don't, oftentimes people think that, women, can they really defend against a much stronger man? Women's self-defense, which is very big for us as well. Yes, because in the street, you're not trying to win, you're trying to survive. So even if it's a quick movement that allows you space to get away, that's already winning in the street, right? You don't have to score a point, you don't have to control, you don't have to even subdue the other person necessarily. If you can just find a little space, if you can just create a little opportunity and avoid the attack or stop the attack. And of course, not to mention what we said earlier, the awareness that jiu-jitsu also teaches us, the ability to anticipate problems, the ability to avoid problems, the ability to de-escalate situations.
And I know, again, different from other martial arts that you mentioned about judo, we do a lot of work with guns. We do a lot of work with knives, with bats, reality of the street situation. So I think of it holistically, jiu-jitsu, it's a major tool, mentally, physically, spiritually, to move through life,
100%. It's a life tool that gives you so many different options to deal with conflict, to deal with tragedies, to be a better member of society. Jiu-Jitsu teaches us that we need each other to improve. You cannot be selfish and be a good Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. Actually, that's one of the best things about this type of practice. Now, unlike even some other martial arts that sometimes you can just use a heavy bag or you can be in front of a mirror, which has many benefits, by the way. Through Jiu-Jitsu and through the practice of Jiu-Jitsu, you learn that you need your training partner. The better your training partner gets, the better you get. So you understand the concept of mutual welfare and benefit.
That is the truth. That's what creating win-wins in the business sense is constantly what I'm thinking about. It is the only way that something will be sustainable if everybody wins.
Yes. Because we're all here together, so, we have to...
That's right. It's a collective consciousness.
Correct.
And to that extent where you actually... And it's not easy. You work with your other two brothers.
Yeah.
Every day. And you're very close.
Yeah, and that's actually for sure, that's the greatest thing our father left us, is a relationship that we have. My two brothers, Pedro, Joaquim, and my sister, it's the same, even though she lives in São Paulo. Hopefully one day she can also move here. What we do with self-defense, she does with horses. But she was a very prominent competitor, still competes. South American champion, competed in Europe, competed here in Palm Beach, throughout, the East Coast, all the way to Canada. And she teaches young children, adults, horsemanship, which, by the way, we had to learn 3 disciplines outside of academic education. We had to learn how to fight, we had to learn how to swim, and we had to learn how to ride horses.
We're in the beginning stages of that with horses. We have a farm, and
that's great.
We're learning that, and it's something, they're very intuitive, horses.
Yeah, the contact with the animal.
Yes, love it very much. What comes to your mind in this moment of something that you're grateful for?
My family. Yeah, my family. Of course, my grandparents that helped me a lot. My parents, my dad, my mom, my brothers, my sister, and of course now my family, my wife. I'm very fortunate. Laura, my wife, and my son Antonio, my nephew, and my 2 nieces, right? And of course the extended family. When I think of family, I also think of my jiu-jitsu teacher. I cannot forget him because he was like family. He was family. So I think that, without family, and friends many times become your family, potentially even can be closer to you than sometimes your blood. But really being grateful, I think it's a great question you ask, because we should always think about that. And right now, just by answering your question, I feel good.
Yeah.
Right? We have to always be grateful. Never be afraid to show your gratitude, right? And never forget those that helped you. So thank you.
And what is something about yourself that people don't know? I always get different reactions by different guests.
Well, something I have to always work on is being calm and composed, which many people see me as a calm and composed person. But as we said before, we're not perfect. And sometimes with the people that we're very close, we feel a little bit more comfortable sometimes to show our weaknesses. And that's okay. That's good sometimes. But I always work on achieving that level of imperturbability.
That's exactly.
It's a good word to remember.
It's interesting because to the outside eye, to myself and everyone that sees you, your brothers, wouldn't even see that, and that's the work, right?
Yeah,
that's the work. It's so nuanced to get to a place where we're truly in flow, where truly there's stuff. But actually, people think, oh, what, he doesn't have emotions? No, he has all emotions, and it's more profound, and it's your reaction.
Correct. Right? No, I am very emotional, But throughout my life, I've learned that you have to learn how to use that the right way and control it. Nah? Just like depression is not good, euphoria is not good.
Yeah.
So we should feel deeply. You should be happy. You should be sad and understand sadness and accept it, like you said very well. But also learn that the extremes can be dangerous.
And I know that we've shared that because our birthdays and our year of birth were only 3 days apart. So happy birthday very soon.
Yes.
May 14th. So I know that we're both Taurus monkeys. So I know
Taurus monkey.
that is our joint journey.
Yeah.
Because we're both very sensitive.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
Yeah.
And really, this has been amazing for me. Wanted this for a long time. We sit down and we continue our journey. And I want to thank you and your brothers, Valente Brothers, and much success. If people want to learn more about jiu-jitsu, train, how would they be able to find out more?
No, thank you so much, Moshe. It's great. As I said before, you're definitely a good example of how my students become my friends, even though we haven't been training directly now. You're training with other instructors, mostly with other black belts, but we're always connected. I feel like I can contact you for anything, just like you contact me for anything. We're always there for each other. And that's really one of the best things about having a jiu-jitsu school the way we do it. I say that's really the most empowering feeling we have as teachers, is to know that we have so many good friends out there. Anyone who wants to, come visit our school and look for us, just type Valente Brothers, and you'll find us on Google, on Instagram, of course, our website, valentebrothers.com. We like to keep our YouTube. We have a podcast too, where the three brothers discuss different jiu-jitsu topics. So we'll be happy to have you come and participate.
Thank you so much, Gui. Really, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Cool. Hope you enjoyed my conversation with Gui. Next week, I'll speak with Sergeant Noah Galloway. Noah is a Purple Heart recipient who lost part of his left arm and left leg in an IED attack during Operation Iraqi Freedom. But he hasn't let that slow him down. He lives with a no excuses mantra, and through his actions, motivates countless people every single day. Please subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode, and follow me on social media at @Popack. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you again soon.